Welcome to 20% Time, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes of Titan, a web consultancy based out of Chicago, but entirely remote with employees across North America. We specialize in Laravel, a PHP framework, which we're often pairing with any number of JavaScript frameworks and libraries, but we do all sorts of stuff. We work on web apps, we work on mobile apps, you name it, we've been working on it lately. I'm your host, Dave Hicking, and this week I'm joined by Dan Sheetz, our CEO and managing director here at Titan. Dan, welcome.
Hey, Dave.
So, Dan, for people who don't know you, because we have two partners here at Titan, and so Matt is certainly the most vocal of the two of you on Twitter. So, for those of you who don't know you, Dan, who don't follow you on Twitter, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm not really very active on Twitter or any social media these days. So that's a thing.
So don't follow you there, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so you can follow me, but that might be a separate podcast. But yeah, I kind of keep a low profile. We've got Matt makes plenty of waves on the internet, and is kind of our face out there on the internet. I'm the one back here kind of running the business. My primary responsibility is to bring in business and to manage client relationships. So you might call it business development, you might call it sales, but ultimately to make sure that we have productive work to do at the company. So I have some other duties as well, not the least of which is hiring and fostering the team that we have. But first and foremost is I'm responsible for making the clients and the money come in the door.
Making sure I don't mess up, all those things. These are important parts of your job.
You don't need me looking over your shoulder, Dave.
So we've got you on the show today because you had come up with this idea. I think it's a really good one. And it's to talk about effectively sort of what makes a good client, or to be more specific, sort of what makes a good relationship between Titan and a client. So we could talk about what good means, and I think we're going to sort of get there. But I want to start with talking about transparency, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I feel like that's something that is often used. Like if you Google like what's a good client agency relationship, you get a lot of blog posts from, a lot of times it's like marketing agencies and stuff, and they always say transparency, transparency, transparency. And any business book will tell you, it's like a buzzword, right? But when you think about sort of what transparency and open communications looks like with a client, what does that look like to you, and how do you establish that?
Yeah, so I think that's a good word that is shot through a lot of the different parts of the agency client relationship, and it starts with the very first kind of conversation that I have with a potential prospect, right? So I would say that compared to some people on those types of calls, I tend to be really casual and to spend as much time as I can just kind of listening to what the problems are that the client's actually facing, right? I mean, they wouldn't be calling us if they didn't have something that they were trying to fix or change or improve in their organization. So what I try to do is, spend as little time as I can talking about what we do, and as much time as I can understanding the nature of their problem, right? So lots of times, even on that first call, somebody, because they may not be thinking really introspectively about their organization as a whole. They may be thinking, hey, I've got bugs in my code base. I've got way too much too many features in the pipeline. I can't get them done. I need help, right? So what they've got is a solution to their problem in mind, which is, hey, let me call these people so that they can come in and do X, Y, or Z, right? So that and they may very well be right that is the problem, and and the question is just, can we solve that problem? But equally often, they haven't really identified what the true nature of the problem is, I guess. And so what I try to get them to do is take a step back a little bit and just talk to me about how the organization was formed, what what the business opportunity that they have before them looks like, and just to try to get them to reveal why they're in the situation that they're in. Now, the scenario that I've outlined is the one that's more like the boss of the business is calling me, or someone in leadership.
Right.
But that's not always who I'm talking to at first. But just that's if it is that person, what I want them to talk to me at a high level about what they're trying to achieve and what the big problems they're facing are. Right. So I'm not sure if that touches on transparency, except to the extent that I want them to, if we're going to have a productive relationship, I want them to, we do better with people who are prepared to speak a little bit expansively about why they're doing what they're doing and what their problems are, right? As opposed to, hey, we just need you to solve this problem or that problem. When can you do it and how much?
Yeah, and I mean that kind of goes to a question I wanted to ask you about, which is, we often talk about, I think, our most successful engagements with clients as partnerships, right? As
Hmm.
opposed to just you hire us to do a thing. Can you talk
Sure.
a bit about why you like to pursue those kind of engagements, and I guess maybe like what makes an engagement a partnership as opposed to something else in your mind?
Yeah, so I do think that that's a term that gets thrown around a lot and doesn't necessarily, it doesn't get kind of unpacked all the time. But to me, what a partnership is a relationship based on trust, and so that's true in any area of life, right? It could be your intimate partner, it could be a business partner that works with you, like Matt and I are partners at Titan, or a partner in trying to achieve something, right? So, and that's the way that I look at our client relationships. Goes back to that point about me trying to understand what their problems are, right? So the only way that I feel like I can be a partner with them is to try to understand what we are together trying to solve, right? So there have been times, and I knew that this would come up at some point in this conversation about what makes a good client, but just what are some challenges to having a good client relationship, and I'm sure you'll ask this later, but one of the things that ends up happening sometimes is where I'm not able to talk to anyone in enough of a leadership role to get at the bigger kind of issues that are that they're facing. This is a little bit in conflict with the idea that we're a pretty specialized agency, right? So usually people are showing up on our doorstep because they know we're experts in Laravel, right?
Right.
Or some other tech that we happen to specialize in. So we have this very tight positioning, and yet I'm trying to have these kind of expansive conversations with people. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it also helps me realize, like, if I'm trying to establish a partnership with someone, it makes no sense to be partners with someone that we can't really help or that we're not an appropriate fit for, right? So a big part of me trying to assess that fit and whether or not will be a good partnership is understanding at a high level, just what they're trying to do.
You talked about trust a bit. Are there specific elements of trust or kinds of trust that you really kind of expect from the beginning when working with a new client? I think one of them is that they need to trust Titan to be experts in
Hmm.
what we're experts in, but
Hmm.
we need to trust them to do some things as well, right? Can you talk a little bit about trust?
Yeah, for sure. So I can trust is at play in many different aspects of the way that we function, and we certainly ask for a lot of trust from our clients, and that's something that I say really early. And if somebody balks at that, or I feel like they're going to be the type of client that or potential client that's going to be more of a sort of auditing things or very skeptical from the beginning, that might be a bit of a red flag that we're not going to be able to work super well together, right? So we do trade a little bit on reputation, right? And by being in such a tight space and being associated with the areas of technology that we're associated with, very often people have some sense that we know what we're doing, right? By the time that
Right.
they're coming to talk to me, and so I expect them to trust that, first of all, that we know what we're doing in that space. So that's just kind of like the most basic thing. But then the way that we engage, I think, probably requires a bit more trust than some other ways you might engage. And this is something that I'm not sure how far you want me to go into this, but
No, good. Let's go.
yeah. So we are a totally time and materials shop, right? So we're
Yeah.
we're never going to spend a whole bunch of time building up really complex specs and then promising that we're going to do all of these features A through X in in a certain amount of time. And there's a hundred reasons for that, but not the least of which is it's just impossible to know how long anything's going to take, right? So instead, what we say is we're going to take a look at the problems you're trying to solve, get a reasonable feel for roughly how big of an ask it is. Find some people to work on the project, block out a certain amount of time, and put those people on the project full time. Put them in a position to do the best work they possibly can while focusing completely on that, on that single client project at a time. So what and at the point that I'm sort of introducing this way of working is I'm already talking about trust.
Yeah.
With with a prospect. I'm saying, we could certainly, try to have a much more buttoned up kind of, documented process. But frankly, we've been doing this for long enough to know that every minute that we spend covering our ass is a minute that we're not spending developing software for you. And that's where we want to spend our time. And so what I'd rather have them do is, trust us as far as, as much as they're willing to for us to get started. And then if it's not working out, then to say, let's move on, let's shake hands and no hard feelings. What I'm not as interested in or what doesn't go as well is when the person is extremely skeptical from the beginning about what are you going to do in X amount of time? They're basically asking me to, me and not just me, but myself and the team to make things up, right? And why should you trust somebody who's gonna make up a bunch of numbers, just to get your business? So anyways, that's a long way of saying we're asking them to trust us enough that we know what we're doing, and that they're willing to pay us to come and be experts in the things that we're experts in.
They trust us to be experts in what we're experts in. And what do we trust them to do? Yeah,
and we need to be able to trust our clients to be, in a number of different ways, but one, to be honest with us when things aren't going like they hope, right? So you know this better than anybody because you conduct all of these health check meetings that we do with our clients, right? So on every client relationship, we on a certain schedule that's set up at the beginning of the project, we take time to step back and sort of be introspective about how things are going. We want them to come in and be candid on those calls. That's why we don't, the devs on the project are not on those calls. It's typically you and me and perhaps one other person at the company. But we want them to come in with, not only kind of like complaints if they have them or servicing things that aren't going well, but to, have given it some thought and to come and bring some creative ideas for how to do things better, right? I mean, we're looking for, it goes back to the idea of partnership. A good partner is spending some time kind of thinking about how to optimize things, and that's what we always want to be figuring out how to bring more value to these engagements, and we need to trust that they're going to be thinking it through as well and bringing their kind of creative solutions to that process as well.
Earlier, you were talking about how when you're having these initial conversations, sometimes it's with someone at a high level, whether they're CEO or whatever. Sometimes it's with somebody at a lower level. And one thing that comes to mind that I think is important as a part of a good relationship is clarity in roles, right? So understanding who the highest ranking stakeholder is, who's going to be making decisions. Maybe they're the person who signs the checks. Maybe they're not. Is that something that you are trying to sort of suss out on these calls? Is that something where it's more like you trust that as a part of the process of us doing the project that we're gonna sort of approach that? How do you think about that when you're talking during a biz dev sort of conversation?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think it makes the most sense to answer that question after a project has started. So, as you well know, Dave, once we've gone through the kind of intake process that we normally do for new clients, I basically stay out of the way, right? So, I may turn up for a call or two here or there. I usually stay in touch with the original person that that contacted me and that I had the series of discussions with before we began the engagement. But I mostly just go back to trust. I mean, I trust you and the team to go and deliver, and you always do. So, but at that, when I do step back in, it typically has to do with a situation where there's something going on the project that where perhaps there's I can just feel stress taking place, or you can feel like there's some strain in the relationships or in the ways that things are going down. And what I always try to do at that stage is to have a conversation with the highest up person I can possibly get the attention of, right? So, and that may not be the person I talked to at the beginning, and it probably isn't. So, if I was talking to the head of engineering or something, and but business conditions are not, they don't have everything to do with how the company is doing, right? So, who I want to talk to is the CEO, if I can, right? Like the person that has the most kind of high level understanding of what's going on with the company, so that I can try to identify where that stress is coming from, right? Usually it's coming from a client, and they won't always even know that they are feeling stressed, but we're just getting this vibe, right? And so what I try to do is go in there and get to the bottom of it if I can. And then, if it's something that there's nothing I can do about it, at the very least, it informs our team, as to kind of what's going on. And we can kind of understand like, hey, is this us or is it just kind of something going on their end? And in the best circumstances, I might even be able to have a conversation with that person that kind of allays some of their fears about what we're up to and what we, expect to be delivering for them. Maybe get a better understanding of the problem in the first place. So yeah.
I feel that Titan is pretty open about our values as a company. If I think about our recent job postings that we've done over the past 6 months, where we even explicitly sort of document it there, but in terms of podcasts that people who work for Titan do, or blog posts, or just even their Twitter feeds, like we're pretty open about that. How often do you find yourself talking about those values with our clients? And then conversely, how often do you talk about their values that they might have?
Yeah, that's a good question. Pretty often, sometimes more obliquely than directly, though, I'd say. I think what I'm trying to do is, and I don't want to confuse this with like people's political views either, because that's something that people are fairly open about that stuff at Titan as well, publicly and privately. But certainly we're not vetting people for their politics when we're talking about working with them.
Sure.
Having said that, I mean, I do want to have the sense that these are good people, right? Ultimately, I want to work with people who care, and I would say that probably the area that this is most reflected in is the way that the company or organization treats their own employees. So we've run into circumstances where I felt like folks, where the company wasn't treating the company or organization wasn't treating their employees in a way that I would if I were running their shop.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things have on a time or two kind of made me feel uncomfortable and maybe swayed me to kind of pursuing a different opportunity. So I mean, I think what I'm trying to do is just figure out like, are these the kinds of people that care and that care about people before something else, and nothing too explicit, but just, a lot of that's just sort of instinct or my sort of own judge of character on someone. But, I don't have really explicit business mentors, but one is my uncle, and he someone who's been really successful in, kind of several areas of capitalism. I remember asking him one time when I was young, like, what's your secret? Do you have any advice in business? And he just said, don't do business with anyone you don't like. So, and, I kind of expected him to have something a little bit more like a business aphorism, but He just said, I don't do business with people I don't like. I mean, if I don't want to talk with them or learn from them or spend time with them, then I probably don't want to sign a contract with them. So, I'd say that's probably the way I approach it, mostly.
I want to shift gears a bit and talk about money and budgets, if that's okay.
Sure. I love that topic.
So I'm going to put out an I feel statement, and you can correct me if I think this is wrong.
Okay.
I feel that in general, people, not just clients, but people in general are very uncomfortable with talking specifically about money. I don't know if it's a cultural thing, and there are obviously some people in our society who are more comfortable than others. But how important is it? I mean, I think it's very important, right, for the client to know their budget and not be afraid to talk about it. But
yeah,
how much time do you find that you spend, and how delicate is that sort of aspect of the relationship process?
Yeah, I don't find it delicate. I do think that there's an appropriate time to broach the topic, and it isn't like in the first 2 minutes, maybe, right? Yeah. Like that's if you most of our leads come in through our contact form, right?
Yeah.
Like the kind of cold or just maybe warmish leads where somebody is knocking on the door. And sometimes when, just from something in the email gives me a little bit of a sense that they may not be able to afford us, right? And then under that circumstance, sometimes I'll send an email back, just kind of trying to feel that out a little bit, because, I don't want to waste anybody's time or, I guess waste my own time either on calls with folks who just clearly we're not, kind of playing in the same ballpark. But in terms of talking about budgets, yeah, I mean, there's no sense in kind of beating around the bush, I guess, either, right? So I'd say, if my first call with most people is around a half hour, by the 15-minute mark, I usually will have, if not explicitly asked them, what the money situation is, I will
Yeah.
have at least raised it, right? And sometimes it's not like an amount of money on this particular project, but it might be like kind of getting to how their company or organization is funded, right?
Yeah.
So, it's a bit of a different conversation if I'm talking to like a VC funded startup versus, a grant funded nonprofit, right? So that's, having that kind of structural understanding of how their money exists at all, helps me at least to start that conversation, and then kind of work our way towards, what are you actually allocating for this project?
Yeah. And then what builds on top of that to me is how, are they thinking about this in a sustainable way, right? Not just
Hmm.
sustainable in terms of like, are they
Hmm.
able to continue? Yeah, funding,
Yeah.
sure. But also like they're going to own a thing now, right? They either
Yeah,
own it already or
sure,
they've inherited it or they're about to because they're asking us to build something new. Do
sure.
I know like downstream, like when it gets to my sort of part of the
Hmm.
project, I'm always frequently trying to talk about like, okay, it's always like not just what are we doing now, but what comes next. But because you have the opportunity, hopefully, to you're speaking to whether it's their CEO or CTO or whoever at the highest
Hmm.
level. You talked about that person with the vision, right? Whoever's got the biggest vision. So,
Hmm.
how does sustainability factor in?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dave. You've heard me talk about this a million times where, there's this part in the conversation. It's usually not in the first discussion I'm having with
Yeah.
someone, but in the first couple, where I say to them either explicitly, either I acknowledge that they already get it, or I have to say to them, so just so you know, like to some extent, you are now going to be a software company after this. Perhaps if it's a new project, or that like, in some cases where I'm saying, that you are in to some extent a software company. Like
Right.
if you're running core aspects of your business uh, you know, on the software that we're either working on or developing from scratch. And sometimes that, it's a little bit eye popping for them. In other cases, they're like, oh yeah, totally. I mean, I absolutely get that. And they, the point of the statement is to indicate to them that they're always going to be paying for software, right? So
Right.
there's no like, let me find an agency from whom I can buy this software development and then just turn off the faucet, right? Like that doesn't, either the plan needs to be to, bring the development in house after we're done, or maintenance in house,
Right.
to find another agency to have a series of contractors, whatever it may be. But yes, before we ever work with anyone, I don't want to say always, but almost always had a conversation about what happens after this is over.
To me, I find that that is such a key part of of establishing that trust and establishing that good relationship is we're not, I like to think, right, we're not just taking their money and running. We're trying to think about like before they even spend any money on Titan, before they spend any time with Titan, which is arguably more
Right.
valuable than money, that they are that we're making sure that they're thinking about, well, what happens when Titan's left, or what happens
Sure.
like next year, like are you
Hmm.
staffing up, or I think, I don't know, to me, I find that really valuable because it's like it goes back to kind of being in a partnership, right? Like they're hiring us, not just to make a widget.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I think that their fear is more often the opposite of that we're going to take the money and run, and more that we're not going to just take the money and run, but we're going to need to be like around,
Oh, interesting.
forever, right? So, in
Like
other,
this is just this
so
is the you got your foot in the door.
correct, like as if we're just trying to, get our hooks into them, and then we're planning on continuing to build them for these services forever. On the one hand, that's a thing where, I'm glad when they push back on that, because it means that they're at least thinking about what happens next.
Right.
And on the other hand, of course, I mean, we're trying to build long-term partnerships and relationships like we've talked about. So, it's okay with me if we stick around for a long time. We have client relationships that we've had for as much as, boy, I mean, the one I'm thinking of, but
Yeah, long time.
9 years.
Something like
So,
that. Yeah.
and I've actually, the one I'm thinking about, I before Titan existed in its current form, I already worked on their stuff for a couple of years before that. So, so those are great, but sometimes equally effective is a situation where we know at the beginning that they're actually going to be hiring an internal team, right?
Right.
They're working to staff up, they're working to build their own team, which for most, especially young companies, that's going to be the approach that works best, right? Is for us to get them to a certain point, and then for them to bring it in house. Now, from working here for a long time, what it takes to build a top-notch development team. I mean, it's something we've been working on every day for the 8 years of the existence of the company.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, right? And we have been lucky to not have to do it quickly, but our clients very often are trying to do that rather quickly. And so what I talk to them about is, what Titan sort of offers in that circumstance is we're that button that they can push while they wait to find the right people. And then when they do, we're more than happy to kind of like get them spun up and make sure that they, the new folks that come in are ready to start bringing value on day one. So I have that conversation with people all the time where, like, if they're saying, well, we're planning on bringing this in-house after you're done, and that, that's terrific. That's a setup that we really like. And the important part that you kind of identified is that we're talking about some plan, right? There's not the plan isn't like, our team is going to come and swoop in and save the day, and then boom, they have software. It's just never, that's not how it works. So,
Right. So I feel like one of the things that and I say we because it happens at all levels at Titan at the project, but one of the things that we do is we are trying to set, like not even just appropriate, but like realistic, like sensible expectations upfront with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to provide flexibility both for ourselves, but also for their needs as we actually get into the project and understand what is going on, right? It's sort of, we're always finding out more about what exactly it is that they're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
How, I guess, so it's like almost like a two-part question. So one is, how is it, I don't know if hard's the word I want to use, but how is it difficult to get most of our clients to sort of buy into the idea of flexibility? Or is that something where you have to spend a lot of time building that relationship? And then, let's start there actually.
Sure. So many of the potential clients that come in already already approach software in the way that we do, which is to say, I talk about this a lot, like lowercase a agile, right? We're not all that interested in a lot of the rigor that's built up around agile capital A in recent years, but we are interested in the idea of some of the ideas from the original manifesto about agile, like putting people over processes, like focusing on creating working software as opposed to sort of writing stories about software or making all these elaborate documentation, all that kind of stuff. So we want to be developing in an iterative way, and many people show up already understanding that, right? Where you need to, they get this idea of kind of fixed time, variable scope, and that things will change as we go. And when that's the case, it's kind of like, great. When do we start? We're happy to come in, and I don't have to explain very much. Equally often, though, I have to kind of make that pitch and help people understand that that's just how these things work most effectively. You have to be prepared to, for the final product. If we're stopping it on a certain day, which we always are, right? I mean, there's always a fixed amount of time that we're engaged for, that we don't know what that product is going to look like. We do know that, we're going to size up the project and break it down into its constituent parts and get through as much as we possibly can in that amount of time, given all the, the variables, and that they also, the client is free to change their mind in that circumstance too. They can sort of, have us focus on a different aspect if the business conditions change, or if just, like for instance, an early version kind of didn't prove out a hypothesis that they had coming in. So it helps to kind of give some examples to them about how to, how that's gone well in the past. And I think usually by the end of that conversation, folks, it seems pretty obvious that it's the better approach. And there are some the way that interfaces with money is sometimes more difficult to get them to understand. But it's kind of kind of my job, right?
Yeah, and I think that one thing that's key to being able to pull off that flexibility
Hmm.
is the fact that hopefully we've established trust, right?
Hmm.
They trust that we are going to help them make an informed decision.
Hmm.
There's trust on our end because it's not like we're saying, okay, well, you have to sign this change request form, and
Hmm.
you're holding yourself to X, Y, and Z. We're
Right.
gonna, it's always a trade off and it's always an evolved conversation. But to me, for that flexibility to work,
Hmm.
they trust us, we trust them. We're all going towards this common goal, right? Which is to make
Hmm.
them the best product that they can possibly build.
Yeah, and that's something that makes those conversations really easy for me, because I know that if what I'm saying to this person is, what you need is a team of two Titan developers, a lead and a staff developer, possibly with a project manager like Dave or Gene on the project, and in that 8 weeks, starting from day one until the end, I'm quite certain that there's no better way for them to spend their money on this project, right? Like those are like, I believe that myself entirely. So what I have to help them kind of understand why I'm saying that, right? And
Right.
you know, uh, and part of that is hopefully we have a little bit of reputation, but some people don't. You know, some people they came to us from a word of mouth or something like that, or they were referred to us, not knowing anything about the tech that we'd be working in, right? So
Yeah.
under that circumstance, I have to kind of help them understand um, the why I think that they're spending their money well. I can't remember what the original question was there,
That we got there. We
but
got there.
yeah,
Um,
okay,
Switching gears because it's not all about
sure.
money. How I don't know how I keep saying how important. So let me ask. I think one good aspect of a really productive and hopefully healthy client agency relationship is that we're all kind of at some level enjoying the work that we're doing a little bit, right?
Hmm.
Like they don't feel it's a grind. We don't feel it's a grind. Is
Hmm.
that does that sound right to you? And do you from your level at high level as you're sort of maintaining that, trying to help maintain that relationship, are you kind of keeping track in any way of, I don't know, call it like a happiness, maybe not happiness index, but some sort
Hmm.
of like, you talked before about like a vibe or like a smell test, but
Yeah,
like on the flip side, like are you kind of keeping an awareness of, yeah, this project is like, we're doing meaningful work. They see we're doing meaningful work.
sure.
Like that trust is working. Like, do you think about happiness or enjoy, like the enjoyable factor or anything like that?
Yeah, all the time, and you know this well because you're one of the people that's helping me keep an eye on that on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
So one thing, yeah, so I for sure am, and the first line of defense there, or the first way that we understand that, is just to talk to our devs, right? Like,
Yeah.
to partially just kind of get a oblique sense of how they seem to be doing, but then also just asking them, right? Like, how's this going? Do you feel like you're in a position to do good work here? Is there anything blocking you? Is there any dynamic with the client that is making this difficult? And so yeah, we're always assessing that. And then if the answer is no, then we're always, what we're trying to do is figure out practical ways to go and alleviate the things that aren't fun, right? So one other thing I would say about that too is, what ends up the kinds of projects that end up being fun are not maybe the ones that I would think a lot of times, right? So sometimes we get ourselves into situations where someone had a difficult code base that had been either developed by someone who was more of a hobbyist, or was just kind of figuring it out as they go, which is fine. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But where it's kind of an unglamorous thing we're doing, where we're coming in and doing a lot of kind of technical debt work, and perhaps adding testing where they didn't have any, things like that don't seem all that glamorous or don't have that much like user facing impact. But our devs a lot of times love those projects, right? And
Yeah.
it's not because there's like some really demonstrable uh, value that faces outward, but because there's meaningful work to be done that engages their expertise in ways that makes them feel valuable, right? And I think I think that's what makes our team happy, is when folks feel like they're doing valuable work, and that work is appreciated by the client, right? So
Right.
whether a client's having any fun is a different, is harder to assess.
Okay.
Some people are more guarded than others. But just going back to those health checks, Dave, that you're on all the time. I mean, we know when the clients are like really happy, right? Because
Right.
they just tell us, I mean,
Yeah, it's true.
and they, and if they're not, we, usually it's something that we probably had a sense was already, a point of contention, and usually there's some concrete action we can take to uh, kind of free it up. So, I mean, I guess I'm not making much of a distinction between like the project going well and everyone having fun, because it seems like that's kind of the, you know, that usually is the key, is, the project is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and
Right.
their goals are being achieved, right? So.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, like, so when a relationship does go off track, how do you
Hmm.
like what are you thinking in your head? Or like, okay,
Hmm.
like, how do I like how do you approach trying to get that on track? I mean, I'm assuming that's a very broad question, and it depends on the
Hmm.
on the client, but I don't know if you have
Hmm.
any sort of thoughts there.
Yeah. So the how is um, harder to assess generally, because it's very context specific. There's the ways to get like a relationship back on track are innumerable, and it totally depends, right?
Yeah.
But I will say this, that the most common reason that a project goes bad at Titan is me, right? It is,
That's
because it
okay. That's
means,
a big statement.
seriously, because usually it's because I've said something or made a promise that either didn't get communicated down to the team effectively, or was sort of, me speaking in a grandiose way with the client, without respecting all the steps that it takes to get to that point, right? So I have over the years trained myself to get to kind of rein myself in a little bit and try to speak in ways that are not going to put my team in a position of having to, like, you know um, sort of pay for my big mouth, right? But but seriously, I mean, the team does such an amazing job when they're put in a good position to do so. That's, usually if it's something on our end, usually it's me and not the team or our project managers. On the client side, I mean, there's all kinds of ways that um, people can begin to misbehave. I mean, everybody who's done agency work have been around a bad client, right? But there's so much that's been said about bad client behavior. I don't have a ton to add there, other than to say that, like, being able to go and speak courageously to clients is something that is hard to do, and also must be done very often. I give you and Matt a ton of credit there too. And when we have to have difficult conversations, you guys typically approach those things really head on, and go and just try to speak truth in the situation when there might be something difficult going on. So it's hard to speak any more generally about it than that,
Sure.
but like just trying to identify the problem, and then come up with ways that don't blame the person, but in fact identify like ways forward that will be better, right? I think
Yeah.
that's the main thing that we try to do. So.
So that's actually the end of the questions that I had. Is there one aspect that you can think of off the top of your head about something that might define or might explain a good client agency relationship that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I don't think so, Dave. A lot of them, when I think about the things that go well uh, for at Titan, it typically has to do with when the client really needs our work, right? And when they show up and are, and we're just the right fit for what they need, and that they're nice folks with that are trying to do something decent and treat people well. And we nearly all projects with those conditions go well. So, it's what I just try to do is put us in that position as often as possible. So, I think that's how I'd sum it up.
Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of the podcast, Dan. I really appreciate it. Since you said people shouldn't follow you on Twitter, we should instead direct them to follow Titan on Twitter, right? Which is
Sure.
at
Yeah.
TitanCo. Titan.co is obviously the website. We're not, I was going to say we're everywhere. No, we're not. We're on LinkedIn. We're not really on Instagram. We're not on Facebook. So Twitter or the website, that's the best place to go.
Yeah, you can find me on our website, and I'm sure I'm out there on the internet in spots too. I just Twitter. My Twitter account's been pretty dormant for a while.
Well, there's no baseball.
So it's true. That was probably my main topic. So it's